And I am the chair of the Fabulous Fabians in Auckland here. And welcome to this opportunity with Craig and Helen. And I'm going to quickly pass to Helen to introduce Craig.
Great. Kia ora koutou, kia ora koutou, kia ora tata koutou. It's really lovely to see you all here. I am really grateful for the invitation from the Fabians to assist tonight, and really pleased that Craig Renney is with us. I've held many a public meeting with Craig in the past, and I know that he is entertaining and informative and a trusted voice out there in the area of economics, and it's going to be a fascinating session. I've got my idea here is that we'll let Craig say his things, then I'll ask some questions, and then we'll ask some questions from the audience. So if you can think about what you would like to ask, we'd be really grateful. I just wanted to say before we started that one of the recent things I had on my social media was a suggestion that people listen to the Reith lectures, because the Reith lectures are particularly interesting this year. They're basically about moral ambition, but in them there's one of those whole lectures is on the history of the Fabians. And so as Fabians, I think you might find that rather interesting, and really the theory that he puts is that the Fabians were able to achieve real change in the way that they worked. They were into slow change, and it stuck. And other forms of change at the time, revolutionary change, had terrible results in comparison. So it's really worth a listen. So I'd highly recommend it. Thank you, Craig. I'm going to let you go for it, uninterrupted.
Thank you. Kia ora to everyone. My name is Craig Renney. I'm the Economist and Director of Policy for the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions. That's my day job. My nighttime job and my weekend job is I'm the candidate for Labour for Wellington Bays, formerly Rongotai. Will be called Rongotai again. We can have nice things again in 2026. Just so we're absolutely clear on that. I want to talk to you today about fixing the basics, building the future, but not only really. A couple of quick things. I'm a professional economist for a living. And that means two things. One, I can professionally compress an audience from 250 seconds. I apologise in advance. Two, we as economists, do you know what professional qualification you need to have to become an economist? No. Not at all. You need more professional qualifications to be a nail technician than you do to be an economist. And so as a consequence, we use words and we invent things in order to make ourselves look fancy. So if at any point in time I say something and you go, what on earth is he on about? Ask. Because it's almost certainly me, not you. Because I'm using a word that only we use and anybody else in the real world. So without any further ado, I want to talk to you about this third, because I'm legally required to, which is the fact that I have a book out called The Good Economy. It's being published by BWB Books, Richard Williams Books. He's doing quite well. Based on my publisher, I'm just trying to be nice. It looks at the kinds of economy that we have now, and what kind of economy we could build, and it's published as the CTU economist, not as the Labour Party candidate. I want to be very clear about that. So what is this presentation about today? This is about a year ahead of us. We officially have 233 days until November the 7th. That's 33 weeks. And you all about being inundated with claims and counter-claims about from the various political parties. And let's be clear, I have skin in this game, so I'll probably be making some as well. But One of the election battlefields that will be most contested is the economy. And the government and national will make claims that we have turned the corner. Now, to use the famous phrase, we have got New Zealand back on track. And today, my job here is to tell you just what's happened since the last election. It's not to spin on it, it's just to give you the numbers. You can then choose to do with those numbers what you wish to after that. Okay. So, as part of that, those claims and counterclaims, 3 weeks ago the National Party put out its early election campaigning. And a key part of that was our website, which looks like this. It's called Fixing the Basics and Building the Future. And on it, it makes a long list of claims of things that the government has achieved in the economy. And often there is no evidence, they are just assertions. They are just simply, we have made things better. Which is nice. It's nice if you can do that if you're a politician, but we thought we'd best have a look at some of these claims. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to examine National's claims, we're going to look at some of the key economic indicators since the last election, we're going to look at what's missing. Because often politicians are just like magicians. It's not what you're seeing that's actually important. It's not what they're saying that's actually important. It's actually what are they not saying? What are they missing? Because that tells you what they care about and what they don't care about. Or at least what they want you to care about and what they don't want you to care about. And then after that, we'll happily take any questions. So, without any further ado, the first claim in that website is that we're lowering inflation and interest rates to begin easing the cost of living. Now, I won't ask you whether or not you feel like the cost of living is easing. We could be here a long time if that's the case. But the claim from the National Party is that we've stopped wasteful spending, which has helped reduce inflation from 7.3% to 3%. Okay, that's a claim. We can make it. But unfortunately, government spending hasn't fallen at all. Total Crown expenditure in 2023 was lower at 40.3% than it is today at 41.6%. It won't be lower until 2028 on current trends. We're actually spending more money than we were back when the then opposition National Party was claiming that we were spending too much. What we're doing is we're spending it in different places. But the total amounts of money being expensed are identical, or indeed a little bit more. But the key takeaway from this, and the thing I want you to take away, is that New Zealand's government spending levels have very, very, very little to do with the inflation that we experienced and the cost of living experience we experienced during COVID and immediately afterwards. That was a global phenomenon. Inflation in countries around the world went up and it went down. Now, I can assert that, or, because I'm an economist, I can show you a fancy chart. So let's show you the fancy chart. So this fancy chart, stay with me, right? This is 37 countries in the OECD. These are all OECD CPI statistics. You can generate this data yourself if you really want to. Each grey line represents one of those countries, like Sweden, like Germany, the Slovak Republic, the United Kingdom, Australia, Belgium, the Netherlands, Finland. You get the point. Yabba, yabba, yabba. And that data goes back to 2017. Now, the red line in the middle, that's New Zealand. New Zealand's inflation story since 2017 is boringly normal. It's dull. Those countries that went up hugely in the middle, the ones jumping off the tops of the charts, those are countries close to the Ukraine that experienced gas and electricity price rises as a consequence of the conflict there. That's why their inflation stories are so large. Everybody else has this general trend up and down as a consequence of COVID. So what does that mean? As an economist, I can put forward two hypotheses. Let's test them. I can say, one, New Zealand's government expenditure was so large, and of that falling inflation story, which we now know has nothing to do with government spending, interest rates have fallen from 5.5% to 2.5%, lowering mortgage repayments and helping Kiwis with the cost of living. Great. And unfortunately, there are no commercial mortgage rates available in New Zealand at 2.5%. The official cash rate isn't 2.5%. The official cash rate is 2.25%. So we have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to that number. I'm being asked to do something here.
Oh, is that 1-to-1?
Okay. Hopefully that's a bit better.
The space still on the mic.
Okay. I've spent today being told off, so there's no difference from now on. So essentially, there is no mortgage rate at 2.5%. The main reason why interest rates have fallen generally is because the economy has stalled. And the main reason why interest rates have fallen in particular is because unemployment has increased. There are now 50,000 more people unemployed than there were 2 years ago. Unemployment is currently 5.4%. But it's only 5.4% because more and more people have left the country. And because the participation rate, which is really important for the unemployment rate, has fallen. If you were to take both of those factors into account, official unemployment would be 7.5%. And so you then say, okay, well, arguably what happened was the OCR was too high, so the official cash rate, the thing that drives your mortgage rates, was too high in the past. Which was the first country in the world to start increasing interest rates as a consequence of COVID and the general price rises associated with COVID? Anyone got a clue? Norway. Norwegian Reserve Bank, followed immediately by us. We were the second. But we increased our interest rates much more aggressively than lots of other jurisdictions. We increased them very, very, very rapidly. And unsurprisingly, the economy tanked. Other jurisdictions didn't increase their interest rates as quickly, and as a consequence, they didn't see the negative effects. But they all saw that, as we showed in the chart, the up and down of inflation. They all had exactly the same story. It had nothing to do with our response. Our interest rates went up really quickly, and all we did was squeeze a lot of people out of work. So, what's happening now? So what's happening now here is that inflation's changed again. Quietly, and for the past 18 months, CPI has been rising. So the Consumer Price Index, the official measure of inflation, is currently 3.1%. But it's been going up for 18 months. And of course, this is before oil. This is before the current challenges. And so, if we look at the household living price index, because the CPI is a lovely measure, but the CPI is just a basket of goods. It includes things like stereo systems, computers, cameras, things you don't buy every day. But we measure the change of that in the CPI. When we look at the things that New Zealanders buy every day, we look at the household living price index. And we can see there that the cost of living is rising if you're poor. And National's policies are exacerbating that enormously. Let me give you a really practical example of what that means. The targeted changes to the interest rate deductibility for landlords. If you are a landlord with multiple properties, interest is now you can now write that off against tax. Your cost of living has improved because you're going to pay less tax. You're going to pay less money in the form of interest. If you're the tenant, you feel no difference at all. And so as a consequence, many of their policies are aimed at groups who already have a lot of income or who have a lot of assets. And again, because I'm an economist, let me show you that, but with a chart. So this is the household living price index by income group. So this line, this blue line, this represents the inflation rate since the election for the lowest 20% of households by income. And what you can see is that it's just a little bit under 8% cumulatively to September 2025. Okay? If I click my button here, what I get is the HLPI for the highest 20% of income earners. Now, what you can see is if I take this chart back, because I can draw this chart back. The two move around a bit, but they're broadly the same. Inflation's always a little bit higher for low income groups. But there's been a break here. Can you see where the break is? It's right here. What else happened right there? Budget 24. The first budget of the national government. And we're getting wider and wider and wider apart, to the point now where the inflation rate for the lowest 20% of households by income is 3 times the rate of the inflation rate for the top 20% of households by income. So we have reduced the cost of living, but for people who weren't already experiencing the cost of living. And for people who really needed cost of living help, their inflation rate is now well in excess of the general rate of inflation. So while I've got you all in a good mood, let's look at the next claim, which is that by raising personal income tax brackets, on average, the Kiwi average family has saved $1,580. Oh, I'm going to put that up there so you can actually see it. Okay, I'm not going to lie to you, taxes have come down. They have changed the tax rates. They did do that. We can't pretend that didn't happen. But what also have fallen are wage forecasts. In the year to June 2027, average ordinary hours wages were forecast to be $47.62 at the last election, in the pre-election economic and fiscal update of the last government. What's happened since then is now it's $45.59, a drop of $2.03 an hour. That works out at an $81.30 cut for a full-time worker in their wage, for the average full-time worker in their wage. So you've gained $12.15 on one side with your tax cut, but you've lost $81.30 in wages on the other, because your wages aren't rising at the rate that they were previously going to rise. Why are they not rising at the rate they were previously going to rise? Because unemployment has grown, wage pressures have fallen, the economy is not growing as quickly as we thought, wages aren't growing as quickly as we thought, and we go round and round and round that circle. So what does that mean? So falling wage forecasts now mean that a full-time worker's wages will be $9,850 worse off over the period between the election and June 2027. A loss of $19,701 for a couple who both work full-time. But don't worry, you got $12.15 a week in your tax cut. Do you feel back on track yet? So, again, because I'm an economist, we like to put these things in charts just so everyone can see what they mean. So that's the pre-fu chart of the wages between 23 and 24, up to 27. And you can see every year the wage forecast going up. And then that was the last half-year economic and fiscal update from the Crown. Wages falling for everyone. Again, a function of lower labour demand. Lower labour demand caused by higher unemployment. Higher unemployment caused by an economy that's not working. The economy is not working because people are terrified. They keep their hands in their pockets. They don't spend any money. When they don't spend any money, companies don't invest because they can't see a profit line. Companies don't invest, they don't create any jobs. Everyone feels a bit terrified about where their job's coming from, and so they keep their hands in their pockets. And then we go round and round and round that cycle. So let's have a look at the next claim. We cut the red tape hindering Kiwis from building sheds and granny flats in their own backyards. This is going to be one of the key things that's going to help grow the New Zealand economy. God help us if we're relying upon the ability to build a shed to recover the economy of an advanced sovereign currency issuing nation with a GDP of $440 billion. Now, I've checked. I've tried to find domestic shed production data in the GDP statistics without success. Even Stats NZ doesn't think it's worth collecting. Now, what this does do, though, the only silver lining about all of this is that allows me. Are any of you big fans of the TV show Succession? Yeah? It allows me to have my favourite image from that entire show, where he gets to say, "You are not serious people. These are not serious people if we are relying upon the ability to build a shed to deliver GDP growth." I mean, I'm just a humble economist. So, let's move on from that. But let's look at the next claim, which is that we've fast-tracked major projects, including housing, renewable energy, and mining projects, to create thousands of jobs for Kiwis in the process. Okay, well, I'm one of the few people sad enough to have gone through most of the regulatory impact statements and the other documents for most of those fast-tracked plans. And there's not a single one that has any evidence that it will create more jobs. It might create the jobs faster, but no new jobs. And one of the things it certainly doesn't do is train anyone. It doesn't create any new apprentices. It doesn't create any new skills training. It doesn't create any new development. It also might overlook many things that we care about. Concerns are overlooked during the fast-track process. Let me give you a really practical example of that. The Taranaki seabed application. We're going to mine the Taranaki seabed. Great. That's the same area which was earmarked for a huge offshore wind development. And you can't have seabed mining and windshore development at the same time in the same place, which meant you were essentially going to delay offshore wind for 15 years whilst we mined the area. The claim from the mining company was that it would deliver $1 billion investment in New Zealand, and that is true. Unfortunately, that $1 billion investment was buying a ship already owned by the company. It was a ship that was currently berthed in South Africa doing the same thing. It was just Company A was buying it from Company B, which was the investment, moving it to New Zealand to mine off the seabed. There was no investment. But because it was on a fast track, we didn't look at it. Fortunately, the board involved has actually removed and got rid of that particular fast track claim. But if we look elsewhere, we do know that the number of houses built by this government has crumbled. The last year of the last government, there were 50,209 units of housing consented. There are now 35,969. And again, because I like a chart, there's the chart. I can show you 2020, 2021, that's the red line, the going up, and then, because this is November 2023, it sinks, and then it keeps sinking, and then it keeps sinking. So let's move on to the next claim. Oh no, let's actually not. Let's ask the question. So what does that mean? The number of people working in construction has fallen 19,044 since the election. growers. Right. Except the government has not delivered a single complete, signed, legally authorised trade deal that wasn't previously commenced by the previous government. Not one. The current Indian free trade deal is being held up by the coalition's own partner, New Zealand First. The EU FTA was finalised by the previous government, and the previous government commenced the UAE and GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, agreements. Now, Gulf Cooperation Council and UAE, given current hostilities, are unlikely to be importing stuff anytime soon. It's a bit difficult to get the ships in at the moment. And so overall, all signed and delivered free trade agreements over the past 2 years will increase our output by a microscopic amount, less than forecasting error. So it won't deliver the growth and the jobs that we want to see. So there's the next claim, that we're lifting savings and investment by doubling KiwiSaver over time so that New Zealanders are more financially secure. Great! We do need to lift our savings rate. We have a chronically low savings rate. We're very bad at it. If we look at Australia, Australia does this much better. Only, National hasn't actually doubled KiwiSaver. It's increased KiwiSaver contributions to 4% from 3%. It's doing that over a number of years from both employers and employees. Only 80% of the increased cost of the employer contribution is coming from the worker's salary, according to the Treasury. Because the Treasury says when you do wage negotiations, the employer knows it's got to pay for its KiwiSaver contribution, so it just offers you less of a pay rise. So you'll now pay for both sides. And any savings you make with KiwiSaver would likely be cancelled by the tens of thousands that you would lose through not being able to access superannuation at 65, which is both the policy of National and ACT if they're re-elected at the next election. Currently, that loss would be $96,000 for a couple after tax. So, again, not really lifting savings and investment, more taking it away. So, while I've all got you in a good mood, let's take a breather here and look at the headline numbers in the economy since the election. Because I can talk about the stuff that they make claims about, but what's happening at a general, at a high level? What's really going on? Well, let's look at the 2026 GDP forecasts. Again, all these numbers aren't mine, all of these numbers come from the Treasury. The Treasury's forecast for 2026 GDP at the pre-election economic and fiscal update was for GDP to be $304 billion. In 2008-2009 real terms dollars, because everything we're doing here is measuring real terms dollars. We're not accounting for inflation. Then, at the first budget of this government, that fell to $295 billion. And then at the second budget, that fell again to $293 billion. And then at the half-year economic and fiscal update, that fell again to $289 billion. We've essentially lost $24 billion in 2 years. Congratulations. You've all lost about $4,000 each. So, okay, well that's GDP. GDP is just an accounting entity. Let's actually look at something that actually matters. Job seeker forecasts. Can you remember we were going to get people off the couch? Can you remember Mr. Luxon said that we were going to get, we're going to get teenagers off the PlayStation, off the couch, into work. Yeah? So this is the job seeker forecast at the election. This is the red line here. And what you can see is that red line, from 2023, it peaks in 2025 at what was 189,000 people, and then it falls away from there. So let's have a look at the latest forecast from the Treasury, which has the unemployment figure peaking at 227,000. And it's also peaking a year later. And across the forecast period, there are 50,000 more people on job seekers than there were just 2 years ago. We have 411,000 people in New Zealand, 14% of the population, who are on a main benefit as their source of income. That's a record. Never had it. Although, I'd love to tell you it's a record. Unfortunately, MSD's computer system broke down in December, and we can't tell you how many people are on benefits, because we don't know. And we can't tell you when the computer records will go back up, because they don't know. So right now, we have no idea. Because they fired the team responsible for the IT. Do you feel back on track yet? So, that's the number of job seekers. Okay. Well, what about another number that actually means nothing at all, but people like to talk about it? Obegal. People know what Obegal is? Obegal is when the government talks about the surplus or the deficit. That's what it's measuring. Obegal is just an acronym. It just stands for operating balance excluding exceptional gains and losses. I'm sure you were all thinking it. And Obegal is when the government says the books are back in surplus. That's the thing it's measuring. At the last election, Obegal was going to be in deficit to the tune of $1.7 billion. That's not great, but it's a number. What happened next? Well, at the first budget, that then increased to $8.4 billion. And then at the second budget, it then increased again to $15 and a bit billion. And then at the half-year economic and fiscal update, it increased again to $17 billion. 1.7 to 17 in 2 years. Because it turns out, stay with me, it's complicated, but it turns out unfunded tax cuts cost a lot of money. And as a consequence, the Obegal deficit exploded. When we were going to get the books back on track, by now, according to the National Party's election documentation, we should be in surplus. But instead we're borrowing record amounts of money just to cover the day-to-day expenses. So, I've asked you this a lot, but I'm going to ask you again. Because, it's really important. And it's something I think, if you're talking to people on the way to the election, it's a really quick way of getting people to think about the economy. Do you feel back on track yet? Because all of these changes are actually in the past. All of this stuff doesn't include the impact of Trump's adventure in the Middle East. Now, because I'm very sad, one of the things I can do is I can forecast the inflation rate because of the impact of fuel changes. Fuel have gone up, fuel's gone up from about $2.50 to $3. If you're in Wellington Central, $3.20, and it's going to keep rising. Great. That dictates an inflation rate of 3.8 to 4%, well above the Reserve Bank's target rate. And why is that important? Because it will come first in tradable inflation. The things we import will become expensive. Then the things we do in New Zealand will become more expensive because they use goods that we import. And so you'll get 2 waves of the inflation. And the longer we have oil prices being high, the more you are baking in 2 waves of inflation. Which means as consumers, you lot out there, you will feel not just the first wave, you will then feel the second wave of inflation. And from a political economy perspective, we haven't seen this in the data yet, but the first time we will see it in the data will be in the June quarter data. Why is that important? Because we get the June quarter data in September, just before the election. So it will seem fine
right up until just before the election, because we haven't seen it in the official data, nor will we see it in the official data. But you will all be feeling it in your pockets. So, at the beginning I said, politics is sometimes like being a magician. It's, don't look at this, look at this. So, what's not on that list of delivery? What's on that list of things that the government wants you to, and National Party wants you to look at in terms of what's important? Climate change. There's not a single dollar for climate change. I'm sick of living in a country where we have 1 in 100 year flooding events every year. I worked on the Cyclone Gabrielle response task force for the CTU. It's great work. It was lovely travelling the country, finding out, different bits that were broken. But everywhere we went, this was climate change. These events were happening more often and more intensely. Instead, what we have is $200 million for new oil and gas exploration. Pub quiz. How much does your average oil rig cost? Bit higher. It'd be a bit more ambitious. How much does your average oil rig cost? Your average modern oil rig? $1 billion. $1 billion. So we're buying 1/5 of one oil rig to drill holes in the Taranaki Bight where we haven't discovered oil or gas for 15 years. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's been great work for us. We've drilled holes in the floor, nothing's happened, and we've managed to sell drilling rights to somebody else to drill holes in the floor so nothing to happen. I mean, it's been a real money spinner for us for ages. But, do you know what? We could have spent that $200 million drilling for geothermal energy in the middle of this country, which is actually where the jobs in the industries that desperately need the electricity are, and we know it's there, and it doesn't deliver any carbon. And it's great and it creates good jobs, but we're going to use it to buy 1/5 of an oil rig. Okay, well, so there's something for climate change. What about child poverty? Child poverty, I had the great fortune of working for Jacinda Ardern for 5 years, and one of the lasting legacies she left in me was a real desire to tackle child poverty. And when I look at the data, I see the government has quietly cut its child poverty reduction targets so that we will now allow an extra 17,000 children to live in poverty, and we can still achieve our targets. Under the 2018 Child Poverty Reduction Act, every political party, with the exception of ACT, signed up to 3 legally mandated targets. But the government changed the targets in order to make them, and I quote, achievable. This also includes material poverty. These are kids who don't have 2 pairs of shoes, don't have a winter coat, regularly go without meals twice a day with a source of protein, live in cold, mouldy housing. Do you know how we measure mould in houses in New Zealand? If the patch of mould is larger than the size of A4, we live in a mouldy house. And we've just decided we can accept, to make it achievable, having 17,000 more children live in poverty. Do you feel back on track yet? So, okay, just don't accept my word for that. These are the current child poverty targets and measures. What can you see in the last column where it says result? Not met, not met, not met. That's the before housing cost, after housing cost, and material poverty measurement. This is the first time we are not meeting all 3 of our child poverty targets. And this isn't a party political point. For years, child poverty was coming down. It was coming down under Bill English. It was coming down under Jacinda Ardern. It was coming down for a long time. It's now going back up. So, what else is not on the list of delivery? Jobs, unemployment. There's nothing here about unemployment, nothing about wages, nothing about helping businesses to pay for high energy prices, nothing about the loss of pay equity for more than 300,000 low-paid, female-dominated workforces around the country. We signed, New Zealand signed, or at least the Governor-General of the day, signed the Equal Pay Act 1972 on the 2nd of October, 53 and a half years ago. We should have cracked that by now, lads? Instead, we will be waiting 94 years on current trends for women to have equal pay in this country. 94 years since the signing of the Equal Pay Act. And that's okay. If you're Pacifica women will be waiting 120 years for equal pay. 2094. Should have cracked it by now. Migration. We're losing in December. We lost a New Zealander every 7 minutes and 22 seconds. Permanently, forever. In that year, we lost 1 in every 73 New Zealanders. People are leaving because they don't have a job, or work's better overseas. And that's happened all the time, but the rate at which that's happening now is so much higher. And why is that important to me as an economist? People coming and going is kind of great. It actually, ironically, creates economic activity because people buy aeroplane tickets. But why is that important? Because as an economy, one of our key drivers of growth has been having more people here. It's really easy to grow the economy by 2% if you've got 2% more customers every year. But that driver of growth has disappeared. And with it, one of the drivers of growth elsewhere, house prices, that's been one of our other drivers of growth, that's not going up because more and more people are leaving. Government spending isn't going up. That's been one of our drivers of growth. So the engines of growth have been turned off. And not turning them back on means it gets harder and harder to grow again. So I could sit down and tell you longer, some more funny stories, but what does all of this mean? Before you all open a vein for light relief. What does all of this mean? Unless we change this government, we are booked, essentially, for 3 more years of this. Only with more asset sales and more cuts. Famously, the physicist Albert Einstein said, the definition of insanity was doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We've been here before. This isn't the first time we've tried this experiment. 1931, the government of George Forbes, under the Liberal Union government, which eventually the two parties joined together to form the National Party afterwards, tried exactly this experiment with predictable results. The good thing was, it led to the first Labour government under Michael Joseph Savage and the 1938 Social Security Act. We tried this experiment in 1991 under Ruth Richardson, when we cut spending enormously quickly, we cut benefits, we tried to grow our way we tried to cut our way to growth, and it didn't work. We're trying it again now. If we keep trying it, you might start to say, perhaps we should do something different. And you'll be told over the next 233 days that the economy is recovering. There are green shoots, more green shoots than a bamboo factory, right? Things are getting better. The data so far tells us that's just not true. And I don't mean that in a political sense. I don't mean that, that's not true. The data is telling us that is not true. That is a lie. And we have to have change because we don't want to actually just build back to where we were in 2023. 2023 was great, but it wasn't good. It wasn't the country we wanted it to be. We had just installed fair pay agreements. We hadn't had any delivered yet. So that is what this election is about. You've got 233 days to decide. Do you want to keep going in this direction? Is that what you want to achieve? Is that what good looks like? Or actually, do you want to do something different? Because if you want to do something different, you've got to vote differently. And the country has to vote differently. Now, I'm assuming because you're all at a Fabian's event, you're all registered to vote. But you may all know people who haven't registered to vote. And because the government's changed the law on voter registration, it's more important than ever. We have the potential that we're going to disenfranchise 100,000 people. That's 2 seats in the House. On all of the previous polls, that's the difference between one side getting in and the other side getting in. So encourage everyone to register to vote. If you've moved house recently, you need to re-register to vote. If you've got friends who haven't registered to vote, ghost them. Don't talk to them until they've registered to vote. Send them the form. It's free. And I want to leave you with a couple of things, please, just to take away from today. We aren't fixing the basics and we aren't building the future as claimed. The government instead is increasingly building 2 countries, a nice one and a not so nice one. And you aren't invited to the nice one. There is a plan, you're just not part of it. And 2, and this brings me back to the book and why I'm here. Everything we do in economics is a choice. Everything we do in politics is a choice. We can choose to do things differently. We can choose different outcomes. The outcomes we're getting now in the economy, the outcomes we're getting now in society are a consequence of the choices the government is making on our behalf. We can choose better outcomes than this. And we have 233 days to choose better than this. Thank you all so much for listening.
I'll just run straight from the floor if that's all right.
Okay.
Yeah,
but I've got a...
Oh, look at this.
Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is go. Thanks, Craig. That's fantastic. And what we'll do is we'll go to questions immediately from the audience because I know you guys are going to have amazing. Yes.
Hi.
Kia ora.
Thanks. Excellent. We now have a microphone. Now, you said that the June quarter will be reported and it'll come out just before the election. What on earth is happening with the March quarter, which will end in just 2 weeks?
So the March quarter data will be sent out in June. So it will be, we won't in the March quarter data capture the full impact of all of the price changes because it will start from the 1st of June, so it will look backwards. But because it's averaged over each month, you won't get the full impact. So the first quarter of full impact will be the June to September quarter. So that's why I'm saying that's the particularly important quarter, because that will likely show the worst of the changes, and those changes will be produced just before the election.
Because surely the media has been playing jolly hockey sticks on the economy front, reporting over and over again about the green shoots, etc. They've gone quiet on that.
Go on, sorry.
Even though the worst of the news won't be out in the March report, there will be a flattening. So it will have some impact on the public view.
It will do. My plea to you, and my plea to everyone here, is essentially not to let them get away with it. Because what will happen is there will be people, there will be cheerleaders who will say everything's fine, this is temporary, right? Things are going to go away. And that our concerns are overblown. And don't get me wrong, if the Donald was to decide to leave the Middle East tomorrow, this might disappear. We have no evidence that that is being planned. And the longer the conflict in the Middle East continues, the more we are likely to bake in that double impact of inflation. So my plea to you is that when people try to play it down, when they say it doesn't really matter, it's not really important to New Zealand's economic position, it really is. Because we're, ironically, playing the opposite game we played during COVID. When the then Labour government was then faced with price rises and the then national opposition was saying, you're to blame. And now faced with the opposite problem, they're going, oh, these are international factors. It's all very difficult. So we have to hold them to account. Because if you remember, the most important phrase they used during the election campaign was, let's get New Zealand back on track. The second phrase that they used was, if you remember it, we'll have a laser-like focus on the cost of living. I might suggest that that laser-like focus on the cost of living needs to go to Specsavers.
Yeah, Craig, I've got a question. It was the privilege of having the microphone. LNG is being imported into New Zealand. It's either a levy or a tax. What's your opinion on it?
So it's crazy. This is genuinely the most bananas policy going. We have infrastructure which we should be getting rid of, but we're going to hook it up temporarily to some slightly cheaper LNG in the hope that it'll solve our energy bills. Energy bills rose last year by 12.2%. They're currently rising by 13.5%. They will continue to rise next year by double digits. The LNG terminal makes no sense at all. It will cost $2.7 billion to rent an LNG terminal for 15 years. But the point that I think you're making is we're going to all be charged a levy for the pleasure of that. Right? Let me tell you a fun story. Under New Zealand tax law, a levy is a fee for service. That's why your rates attract GST. So because it's a levy, you're going to pay GST on the new levy on your bill, which is supposed to reduce the electricity bill. So you're going to pay a tax on the levy to reduce your bill. Now stay with me. Tax under New Zealand tax law is an impost. It doesn't attract GST. So if you called it a tax, you wouldn't pay GST. But because they can't call it a tax, because they promised no new taxes, you're going to pay GST. Why is that important? Because over the lifetime of the terminal, that's $500 million of new GST that you're going to pay because they can't be honest when calling a tax. You're going to pay it because they call it a levy. None of which goes to actually help energy, none of which helps to actually tackle any of the real problems. It's just $500 million in the pocket of the Crown. Fun times.
Yes, you're quite right. You're very depressing.
You should try being me. That's because the party invites get less and yes every year.
Well, there's the old joke, of course, about why do we have astronomers?
Yeah, but it just, yeah.
Astronomers, and that's because it makes astronomers look
good.
like.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, I accept all your facts, right? But what are we going to do, or what are we going to produce as at least one counterfact that we can say? Sorry, that we can say that we will be able to use if we change the government.
In terms of what is one counterfactual that we will be doing instead of what the current government's doing?
That's right, that we can produce as a way of doing it, yeah. Sorry, yes, I'm very bad with the microphone, yeah.
So I think the question that you're asking is, what is one thing that the opposition would do differently to this government? So, for example, first things first, stop giving all the money away.
Yeah.
Right? Over the past two budgets, we've given away $23 billion in tax cuts. And we've complained we don't have any money to spend on the health service, the education service, or anybody else. We've spent $12 billion on new military toys. Right? We've bought, and I love this, we've spent $100 million buying 100 Javelin anti-tank missiles. Who are we invading?
Who's putting the tanks here?
We don't have any tanks. I've got an idea, right? I've got an idea. Stay with me. You're all in on the idea. That room over there, that one there, we're all going to say there's 100 anti-tank missiles in that room. We're going to pretend. We're going to put the $100 million into a savings account. It's going to collect 3%. After 30 years, when we haven't fired the missiles, we can give everybody lots of cash. And we can pretend we fired the missiles during a training program and we're all better off. There are lots of things we can do. It's about making better choices with our money. We can, for example, choose to pay people properly. We can choose to give people the pay equity that they legally deserve. We can choose to tackle child poverty properly. Do you know how much child poverty costs this country? I know because I've worked it out. It's one of my jobs. 4.5% of GDP every year is lost as a consequence of child poverty. We can choose to tackle underinvestment in health. We can choose to tackle underinvestment in education. We can choose to do all of that. We can choose, for example, to have a capital gains tax in order to start delivering free GP visits. We can choose to do all of these things, but one of the first things we should stop doing is stop giving all the money away and then pretending we have no money. We are like a drunk sailor. So let's stop pretending we don't have choices. Let's stop pretending these things are natural. They are not. They are choices, and we can choose better outcomes.
Hi there. My name's Aria. I was wondering if this country could do something about the excess ocean dumping and water scarcity. For example, one cotton shirt made in a Chinese factory store uses an average 2.5 years of scientifically of average human water consumption, and the excess Japanese cows dumped in the ocean. Yeah, so
we do have a problem with water in New Zealand. I come from the city which best exemplifies how not to treat water systems. Those of you who don't know me, I live in Houghton Bay, and Houghton Bay is right next to Lyle Bay, and Houghton Bay has this fabulous view of Moa Point. And you've got some real challenges with water there. It's one of the best examples actually of that historic underinvestment that we haven't delivered over years. Well, we've underinvested in things, and again, we also overexploit our water, because you're dead right. The number of cattle on the Waikato Plain is currently making the water supply in Canterbury undrinkable. The number of hort and ag users who are overexploiting our water supply is putting our future water supply at risk, because we don't manage and conserve it properly. But again, that's because we don't invest in it. There's an iron law of economics, it's called Marshall's law. Right? Marshall's law is really simple. Anything that is free is overconsumed. Water is free, it's overconsumed. And so we need to do better at, if you forgive the pun, marshalling our water resources, because it's a really important part of actually New Zealand's growth story. Many countries are water scarce. Many countries need water. We were inundated with the stuff. We're hugely abundant in it, and we should be using it to our long-term advantage. But again, it's all part of the same story. We don't have an economic plan. Because we don't have an economic plan, we don't plan for change. Because we don't plan for change and we just muddle through, we hope the future will turn up until it doesn't, until Moa Point falls over. And that's the kind of difference, and I hope you agree, we need to be managing our water resources better, because they're an important part of our economic future. Kia ora.
Good evening. We hear a lot about cutting wasteful spending. Mm-hmm. To me that sounds counterproductive, because it's taking money out of the economy. And who decides what's wasteful?
It's a great question. In a previous life, as well as working for the Treasury, I used to work in the UK for the Audit Commission. So we used to try and measure that wasteful spending. And we had formulas and calculations, and we'd work it out using what we call value for money audits and that sort of thing. So there are things you can do, and New Zealand is very poor at doing value for money calculations. Really, really poor. Because we're very good at measuring the cost of stuff, but we're very poor at measuring its value. Let me give you a real-world example of that. I can tell you pretty much on a day-to-day basis what it costs to build Dunedin Hospital. The steel, the land, the concrete, the beds, the everything else. Yeah? And I can draw you a long chart which has boxes and stars and things on it, and it'll go, this is where we're going to build these things, and this is how much it will cost, and da-da-da-da. What I can't tell you is what not building Dunedin Hospital for 20 years has cost people in terms of pain, opportunity, wages lost, output lost, training, because Dunedin's the training hospital, doing it better that way. I can't tell you any of that value because we measure this one to 2 decimal places, but we don't measure that one at all. So you're dead right. It's the measurement bit, and we don't do it consistently, and we don't do it well anywhere inside New Zealand. It's a consistent problem.
And it's taking money out of the economy.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to do that, because let me give you an example again what I mean by that. So Bill English had this social investment approach. He wanted to spend a little bit of money, so he would get some people who were on benefits or on something else, and he would stop spending money for the Crown, right? That's actually not the dumbest idea in the world. That's just investing. Let's invest in someone. Let's try and get them a better outcome. The challenge for Bill was he wanted to take all the savings and deliver them as a tax cut. Now, that would be a cut. But if I took all those savings, if I invested in someone and they had a better outcome, and I suddenly had all this spare cash because I wasn't getting all this bad outcome to spend money on, it just means I've now got more money to invest in the next person and the next person and the next person. It's not necessarily about cutting. It's actually about making the investments and then using those savings to then invest in the next person and the next person and the next person, so we can deliver better services. And everyone... Sing it, sister. It's all about doing that, and if you can do that well, then you can make a really important change. But just simply cutting without thinking about the consequences, all that does is it just time preferences things. It just means I'm going to get the benefit now, and future Craig is going to pay for it, and future Craig is more handsome and capable than current Craig. And that's not a recipe any of us want to be living with, because future Craig isn't more handsome and capable than current Craig.
Thank you so much for all the things that you've said tonight, Craig, and I look forward to you being part of the caucus after the election. I just wanted to make a few comments. First of all, I just want to reflect that in my work in my portfolio, I have one of them is sexual and family violence. And the other day I went to a training session for workers in those fields, and they're incredible people. And there was a police officer there, and he was talking about how he works in this field, and there are all these people who could be turned around, but they're so busy dealing with the highest risk people that all the ones who are a little bit lower risk, they're missing them completely. And those turn into our homicides, they turn into traumatised children, and they absolutely impact on the kind of New Zealand that we live in a terrible way. And those were the professionals. They're talking about the impact, the heartbreaking impact, the demoralising impact. So you're not the only depressing person. I had quite a few of them there.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Misery loves company.
And so I take your point about the wasteful spending rhetoric, that it's completely nuts, that we really need to start dealing with our society in a humane way, which puts us in a very different trajectory, and that we're making terrible choices at the moment, actually, like really choices that are very, very harmful. And our children are the ones who are suffering extremely. And so those child poverty statistics, the very idea that you would move the goalposts, it's a terrible thing. I use that language because it's something that I think we should all be passionate and emotional about, because we talk about making choices. This government is making choices that are absolutely appalling. I thank you very much for what you've said, and I thank the Fabians for running this fantastic session, and Paul for all the stuff you're doing. And Paul, you just have one little notice, I think.
Yes, just very quickly. Yeah, thank you. Turn on the mic. Just a very quick notice. Look, I'm a little bit unhappy about the presentation here because of the dust on the desks, and but I know, but it's because we put in the Trades Hall Trust has put in the disabled access. You can see over there, which has taken us quite a bit of time, and then I just completely didn't realise that it was in an act. Now, just as a quick promo for the Fabians, in your wills, right? In your wills, Fabians. Okay. Thanks everyone for coming, and it's been great.
Thank you.
Yes, Alan's been there. Oh, why not?